You remember it clearly. The blue dress your mother wore at your 7th birthday party. The exact words your best friend said the night everything fell apart. The smell of the classroom on the first day of school. You can see it. You can feel it. You would stake your life on it. It never happened. Not the way you remember it. Maybe not at all. And the disturbing part isn't that your memory got it wrong. The disturbing part is that your brain didn't fail to record the moment. It deliberately constructed something that was never there. And it did it so convincingly that you cannot tell the difference. You never could. Most people think of memory the way they think of a video camera. You live through something, your brain records it. Later, you press play. The footage might be a little grainy. Some details might be missing. But the core of what happened is preserved somewhere, locked in, accurate. That model is completely wrong, and neuroscientists have known it for decades. Memory is not recorded. It is reconstructed. Every single time you remember something, your brain is not retrieving a file. It is rebuilding the experience from scratch, using fragments, filling the gaps with logic, expectation, and whatever you have come to believe about yourself and the world since the event occurred. Every time you access a memory, you are rewriting it, and the rewrite becomes the new version. The original, whatever it actually was, is already gone. This is not a flaw. It is how the system was designed, and for most of human history, it worked well enough. Close enough to accurate, flexible enough to update, but it also means your brain has been quietly editing your entire life story every time you revisit it. Every reunion that made you nostalgic, every argument you replayed in your head, every childhood story you have told so many times it feels like bedrock. Each one has been revised. Some of them have been replaced entirely with something your brain assembled from pieces that were never part of the original experience. In 1974, a psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus ran an experiment that should have changed everything about how we trust human memory. She showed participants a short film of a car accident. Afterward, she asked them questions about what they had seen, but she changed one word in the question. Half the participants were asked how fast the cars were going when they hit each other. The other half were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. Other. That single word, hit versus smashed. The group that heard smashed estimated the cars were going significantly faster. And 1 week later, when asked whether they had seen broken glass in the film, the smashed group was far more likely to say yes. There was no broken glass. Loftus had not just influenced their answers, she had altered their memories with one word. A week after the fact, she spent the next 5 decades proving this was not an edge case. In study after study, Loftus demonstrated that human memory is not just fallible, it is penetrable. Suggestions, leading questions, things you read, things other people tell you, they do not just color your memories, they rewrite them. In one of her most unsettling experiments, she implanted an entirely false memory into adult participants, using nothing but a short written suggestion and a few follow-up conversations. The memory was of being lost in a shopping mall as a child, separated from your parents, frightened, eventually rescued by a kind stranger. It never happened to any of them. About a quarter of participants came to remember it as real. Some added vivid details. The color of the stranger's jacket, how they felt walking back toward their parents, specific things they said, pure fabrication, generated by their own minds in response to a suggestion. And they were completely certain. This is where it stops being an abstract science problem and becomes something much harder to sit with. Because Loftus was not just studying memory in a lab, she was watching the same mechanism play out in courtrooms across the country. Eyewitness testimony, the most trusted form of evidence in the American legal system for most of the 20th century. A real human being looking a jury in the eyes, saying, "I was there. I saw his face. I am certain." Loftus began working as an expert witness in criminal trials. She testified in more than 300 cases. What she found was that confident eyewitness testimony and accurate eyewitness testimony had almost no relationship to each other. The certainty people felt about what they had seen was not connected to whether they had actually seen it correctly. And in case after case, the details witnesses swore to had been subtly shaped by police questioning, media coverage, conversations with other witnesses, and the simple passage of time. The Innocence Project, which uses DNA evidence to exonerate wrongfully convicted people, has reviewed hundreds of cases where someone spent years or decades in prison for something they did not do. In more than 60% of those cases, false or mistaken, eyewitness testimony was a contributing factor. But here is the part that goes deeper than courtrooms and experiments, because this is not just something that happens to other people in controlled studies. This is happening to you right now. The memories that form the foundation of your identity, the ones that explain why you are the way you are, why you made the choices you made, why certain people hurt you and certain places feel like home. Those memories have been reconstructed hundreds of times, shaped by who you were when you last accessed them, filtered through the story you have been telling about yourself since, the version of events your parents told you until their version became yours, the argument you replayed so many times you can no longer remember what was actually said. The childhood you remember is not the childhood you had. It is the childhood you have built across decades of remembering it. And there is no way to know what was lost or added in the process, because the original no longer exists anywhere. In 1997, neuroscientist Daniel Schachter published a framework he called the 7 Sins of Memory: transience, absent-mindedness, blocking, misattribution, suggestibility, bias, and persistence. 7 distinct ways the system breaks down. But what Schachter was careful to point out was that most of these sins are not failures. They are side effects of features. Your memory forgets things that are not reinforced because a brain that held everything with equal weight would be unusable. It updates older memories when you access them, because a system that could not revise itself would trap you in the past. It fills gaps because a brain that stopped functioning every time it hit incomplete information would leave you paralyzed. The very mechanisms that make your memory flexible and functional are the same ones that make it unreliable. You cannot have one without the other. So, where does that leave you? If your memories are not recordings, if they have been rewritten every time you have accessed them, if suggestions and questions and time have been quietly editing them since the moment they formed, if a researcher could sit down with you tomorrow and, using nothing but carefully chosen words and a few conversations, plant a memory of something that never happened, then what exactly are you made of? Because the story you tell about yourself is built almost entirely from memory. Your personality, your relationships, your fears, your sense of who you have been and who you are becoming. If the material those things are made from is reconstructed, revised, and partially invented, what does that make the self that was built from it? Here is what the science actually says. Your memory is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. Building a workable version of the past that helps you navigate the future. The fact that it gets things wrong, that it fills gaps, that it can be influenced, that it sometimes invents things entirely, those are not bugs in the system. They are the cost of having a brain flexible enough to learn, adapt, and survive. The mice in a cage with perfect memory and no ability to update it would not last long. You are not a recording device. You are a story that is constantly being revised. The question is not whether your memories are accurate. Most of them are not completely. The question is whether the story they are building is one worth living. Because that part, at least, is still up to you. And the blue dress. Ask your mother. She might remember it differently, or not at all.